My slides tonight are from my trip to Mount Rainier this year, and this is a really good guidebook. Yarrow. This is for somebody who hasn't been to Mount Rainier. These slides might be pretty impressive, but it was actually one of the worst years that I've seen for wildflowers at Mount Rainier. Although I certainly had a great time photographing them and enjoying the wildflowers. This is a Mount Rainier endemic, and it was taken near Burroughs Mountain. The photographs were taken either on the Paradise Glacier Trail, the Natchez Peak Loop, or the second Burroughs Trail on the east side. And for those of you who are interested in moving your flower photography to the next level, I will be offering a class through the Oregon Society of Artists this summer on photographing wildflowers in the field. And I would add that these are all taken the third week of August of this year.
Hello, just a couple pictures from me. The two lilies were from a NPSO hike up in Nob Hill Nature Park with Carolyn Skinner. She was a great guide that day. And then the other two were taken while I was working outside. Well, one near Estacada, and then the sedge was now near Hillsborough. I've been working as a natural resource technician, so I've been enjoying the sedges and rushes more as I've been working more in the wetlands.
Frank, if you hit your right arrow key, I believe it will go to the next slide.
I've been trying the various.
Do you see the resume slideshow option?
Yes, I just clicked it and
Okay, hang on.
it it froze. Let me I guess I'll stop share and there we go. Okay, so now.
I can take over from here if you're having trouble.
I just get back on here. I had to get out. Hey, come on. No, where was I? Okay, so share screen back again. Okay, so let me. Now I should be able to backtrack. Come on. Huh.
It was this one.
Here we go. That right one now. From current slide. So how do we get back on the full screen here? Okay, now we're back on. Sorry about that.
Frank, would you like to share something about the New York Botanical Gardens?
Well, it's a world famous botanic garden, one of the largest. My daughter is associated with them. She teaches botany at St. John's University on Long Island on Queens, and has colleagues and is associated with the garden.
Is it really large?
Yeah, it's has a herbarium as well as a garden.
Frank, I think it stalled again. Can you try hitting your right arrow key?
Yeah. My scroll button works.
I first heard about the Monte Cristo Range from Russ Jolley back in the 1980s. He advocated for Forest Service protection of this small mountain range in Washington's South Cascades. Today, parts of it are protected as a research natural area on U.S. Forest Service land and as a natural area preserve on Washington's DNR lands. The Monte Cristo Range forms a horseshoe around the headwaters of the Little White Salmon River. It is anchored on the west side of the horseshoe by Little Huckleberry Mountain, while the Monte Cristo and Monte Carlo peaks anchor the east side of the horseshoe. The Monte Cristo Range is a mix of montane forest and rocky, steep-sided balds that host prime rock gardens and wildflower meadows from mid-June to mid-July. Although the Pacific Crest Trail is located several miles to the west, the Monte Cristo Range truly straddles the east-west divide of the Cascade Crest and contains flora from both sides of the Cascades and flora not found in the nearby Columbia River Gorge. So as you will see, as we go through the flowers in my show, I put together a mix of what I consider kind of East Cascades and West Cascades species, and often they're growing nearby one another, really showing that this is the divide of the Cascades. Several trails access the Monte Cristo Range. Little Huckleberry Mountain Trail number 49 on the west side, Monte Carlo Trail number 52, Monte Cristo Trail number 53, and the Buck Creek and Penny Ridge Trails on Washington's DNR lands. So this presentation is really focusing on the Monte Cristo Trail, although many of these wildflower species also can be seen on the other trails. So first you get the blue haze of the Collinsia and the Delphinium, and then a few weeks later, as those species die back and go to seed, then the onions take over. So those meadows have a really spectacular flower show if you hit it right. I should say that these photos are taken from several different trips there, both this past year and the year before that. But you can see that you can have columbine and scarlet gilia along the same trail, depending on whether you're in the woods or out in the open. Well, the trailhead for the Monte Cristo Trail is outside of Trout Lake. I particularly like that you can see both species of honeysuckle on the same hike. So these are ridgetop trails, but as you know, ridges in the Cascades aren't flat. So you get little flat sections like this, and then you got lots of steep downs and ups. So the trails aren't long, but they are somewhat arduous because they were built to access fire lookouts. And so they're graded pretty steeply. They aren't graded for the modern day hiker. They were built to get from the trailhead up the supplies up to the lookout. So this is part of the same trail where you're having to switch back up the side of the ridge to get onto the ridge top. So I want to set expectations correctly for if you decide to go there, that there is quite a bit of elevation gain. There are great views in different places of Mount Adams and Mount Hood from the Monte Cristo Trail and the Monte Carlo Trail. Yep, and Dave's Water, Little Huckleberry's also a good hike.
This is Paul, and I was just asked to identify some of these. So this looks like it's a likeness, maybe one of the Campions, maybe likeness Alba or whatever scientific name it is now. And one of the white delphiniums, without knowing where this is, I'm not sure, leucophaeum or something like that. And Columbia frasera and the gentian family. Oh boy, I want to say Stenanthium. I just think of it as spiders dancing on stems. Or excuse me, it's Bolandra, sorry, Bolandra boragina. Spotted coral root. And looks like a cat's ear mariposa, Calochorda subalpinus. And looks like green corn lily, veratrum schultzianum, I want to say. And western pasque flower or western anemone, Anemone occidentalis. And Brown's peony, a nice find. Looks like it's being pollinated by ants. And I want to say probably Drosera rotundifolia, but again, it's hard to see the full leaves. It's a sundew, sticky glands on it for eating insects. And our mission bells or chocolate lilies, Fritillaria affinis. And more chocolate lily. And Schooler's Corydalus schooleri. If you can get it established in your yard, it goes crazy if it's wet.
Hi guys, I took a lot of these out when I was doing field work in Eastern Oregon. I was doing AIM surveys for the University of Oregon, so taking vegetation inventories and measuring a bunch of stuff on various plots all over, like all of Eastern Oregon. I'm not sure which Castanea it is, but these were taken all over Eastern Oregon, and then some of them were taken in the gorge, but I was mostly out by Burns and Jordan Valley. And most of the really crazy blooms that I saw were up by in the south by Jordan Valley.
Hi there. I just wanted to share a few photos of native plants in my garden that attract leafcutter bees. So these really cute little native bees that use pieces of petals or leaves in their nests. This is Clarkia amina in my garden, and you might be able to see some little notches in the petals from the leafcutter bees. And here I caught her in the act. She'll take this back to her nest and line each cell where she lays an egg and puts a little pollen ball in there. She's just finishing it up. This happens really fast. It's hard to get a photo of it, but I managed to capture it. Here's another leafcutter bee in a little piece of bamboo. And I couldn't figure out what orange flowers she was using for this, because I don't have any flowers that color in my garden. So I looked around and around, and I finally went back to that patch of Clarkia, and all the flowers were spent. It's an annual. It dies back every year in late summer, and the flowers were all gone, but the leaves were turning orange, and she was just determined to use that plant one way or the other. They usually just use the petals, but she was using the leaves. And here's a leafcutter bee peeking out of one of those bamboo poles. I put these poles in the ground as hose guides, and they ended up being homes for a few of these little leafcutter bees. And then the next morning, she's got it all finished and capped off using those Clarkia leaves. She's not very neat about it, but I guess it gets the job done. Here's a leafcutter bee on my Nootka rose. They really like to use roses as well. And this was late in the year. This was October. I don't know if she was tired or what, but after she cut each little piece of leaf, she would stop and rest. And it was really good for photography. You'll see in the next photo, she's just hanging out. And then she took her little piece over to the neighbors. I was kind of jealous. I wanted them all for myself. And this is what the damage looks like on my rose. The holes usually aren't this perfectly circular, so this must have been a really especially diligent bee. Here's some damage I found on snowberry. I found this after the fact. I didn't get to see her taking the pieces, but it sure looks like leafcutter bee half moons to me. I was going through some old photos and I noticed on some California poppies in my friend's garden. It sure looks like leafcutter damage there. So apparently they use California poppies too. They also use raspberries. And this last photo is Epilobium ciliatum. I always thought this was a European weed, but apparently it's native here. It's even on the Portland plant list. And I've seen pollinators use the little pink flowers too. So I guess in the future, I won't pull this all up. I'll leave a little bit here and there. Epilobium ciliatum.
All righty. Well, so my photos were chosen because they went along with all the various BioBlitz that David Anderson and I put together. So here we are at Lake Bonneville, and spring is starting in the gorge. And our first BioBlitz of the year then was the native plant appreciation. month. So again, when you're dealing with a website, the dates aren't exact, but what is more beautiful than those grass widows? And I was just getting ready to take Mike McKeag's class on photographing flowers. And so I felt pretty good about this one. And I would love to have people join in, because on iNaturalist, I have two different suggestions for this one: Fregosa and Interfolia. So anybody want to call in on that? Again, very small, just a few things that had come up. This was mid-March. Spring had just started. And now look, we're still there, but now it's a new month. It is now May. And now we are at the Great Camas Patch. It's changed its name, same place though. So my question is this really Great Camas, or is this small Camas? And on the next photo, you can see a close-up. And one of those little outliers that are so beautiful. This is one of our stewardship projects. So if you would love to come see this beautiful place in bloom, May 1st is normally when we go. So sticking with the Wildflower Appreciation Month, you know, sedums are wildflowers too, right? And so this is the broadleaf sedum, spathifolium. I don't have enough. Anyway, and this was taken at Nob Hill. So that was a place that I had never visited, further down the Columbia. And just amazing, just amazing. And so this is kind of a trick in language, because flowers, common names are quite repetitive or varied. So we have an oval leaf viburnum. And this place, Nob Hill, is gorgeous for these. And it is becoming, the habitats are becoming endangered. So this is a wonderful place to see them. And look, you can see a wayfaring tree as well. So I don't know if you caught that, but the leaves actually do look different on these. And if anybody wants to help me see if there's really two different kinds of viburnum there, I know Carolyn and I spent some time talking about that. And I'm glad she got a picture of the serviceberry, because that's another beautiful shrub that's out there at Nob Hill in St. Helens. So this is still Wildflower Month, and I found again another beautiful place. This is up the Salmon River outside of Welch's, and this is a giant corydalus. And there were fields and fields of this corydalus along the river, just gorgeous. And that's from large to the very small. And this is a Linnea borealis. And this is also along the Salmon River. I also find this in fields and fields of it at Oxbow Park along the Sandy River. And it just turns out that my daughter's name is Linnea, and she is a twin. And she just started a new photography I don't know, company or whatever, and she named it Linnea borealis. So that was kind of cool. And other little fairy bells. And what's lovely is to be able to see these two side by side. So we have our Prosartes hookeri with those hooker skirts showing the nether regions. And coming soon, we have the Prosartes smithii, or the fairy lanterns, which are much more discreet. So then our next BioBlitz in June was the Fire BioBlitz. And this is not necessarily in a fire area, but this is at my son's property in Sandy. And this is the only place on his 40 acres where this Dryopteris expansa grows. And so this old stump, I think, is a clue. And I was trying to open it up to find some of the burnt areas in Clackamas County, but this is what we got for 4th of July. Again, this is the only place on his 40 acres where the Columbia lilies are found. And this was a good year for them. So I'm hoping that they will reproduce. And finally, with some help from some other iNaturalist folks, we were able to define some of the burned areas. So this is part of the Beachy Creek fire up the Clackamas. Once the Clackamas had gotten open for people to go up at least to Ripplebrook. And of course, this is a Holodiscus discolor, and you can see the large branches of the original tree and how it has come down from back up from the roots. And that's what I found a lot in many of the burned areas that I did get to, both on the west side and the east side as we traveled to our board meeting retreat over to Sisters. And of course, where there's fire, there's fireweed. Now, just a trick that we are now moving to the alpine BioBlitz. And are these alpine plants? Not really. This is the springbank clover. And actually my mimulus kind of messed up on me. I had a toothed mimulus, but now I think I have a magnificent in this picture. But I really just love these together. And this is actually at the coast. So, but we're still trying to get to the nearest alpine area in the Coast Range. And so again, for my very first time in my life as an Oregonian, I finally made it to Mary's Peak. And I came up with this as the harsh paintbrush. But again, paintbrushes, I think, are kind of like lupins. You have to really know your stuff. And here we have our Western Columbine and our Western Hemlock. Sweet little peeking out there. And here's another clue that we're somewhat in a subalpine. And part of this is the noble fir. There are still some noble fir in the Coast Range in different areas, which makes it special. And the Queen's Cup or blue bead or bride's bonnet, whatever you want to call it, I have only really seen when I've ridden horseback across the Cascades. So to me, it is a subalpine alpine flower of the woods. And here we are, the highest point in the Coast Range. And there's a little sunshine there in front of us poking through the clouds. And I wish I could have seen the ocean, but I knew it was there. And on the other side, the mountains just peeked right out. Take it away, Dave.
Okay, my first few slides are from the hike that Andrew and I led up to Cathedral Ridge on Mount Hood in July. And we got to see blooming rhododendron macrophyllum and probably at their height up there. Let's see. Got to see the white-flowered rhododendron or rhododendron albiflorum in bud only. It was a little bit early for them to bloom. I think a week later they might have been blooming. We were able to compare the foliage of them and Menziesii along with the buds. And so everybody on the trip got to learn how to tell the difference between the foliage and fungal infections on the foliage. And this is the view along the trail. It's amazing how thick the rhododendron is in the woods at this location. And of course, see some interesting insects, and you can see the white, long-lipped part, how it got its name. And we got up into the snow level before we, some of us turned around. The down trees in the background are from the Labor Day storm a couple of years ago. And even old kids have fun making snow people. And the robber flies are really interesting. They're some of my favorite insects to look for when we're up in the mountains. They are rather colorful. They're bugly, as I say, but really fascinating. And if some of you are really lucky and you look for grasshoppers, you might find our endemic Mount Hood shortwing grasshopper that's found around Mount Hood up in open rocky areas or even in old cut areas, brushy areas. And we made it up to Bonnie Meadow, and I can't remember which species this is of gentian. And we found a patch of white-flowered rhododendron not in bloom at near the meadow. That was a new location for us, and we also found a new patch down in Mount Low on Rhododendron Ridge in Clackamas County. So we're trying to find where they're found and habitat and stuff. So. And I believe this is it.
This is a few pictures from doing rare plant monitoring in Washington this past year. Although this was not a rare plant trip, this was actually a trip in support of Susan Saul, who was out monitoring pikas in Indian Heaven. And so we start early. This is the obscure or Dell's Mountain Buttercup. And we volunteer with the Washington Department of Natural Resources to do at least 2 monitoring events on their plots out in the gorge. This one we may see in bloom here within a month. A lot of times they're in bloom by mid-January, sometimes even early January. Very, very pretty buttercup. And so it's still height of COVID season, so we're all masked up, working together, and we're doing 2-meter quadrats on 50-foot or 50-meter tapes. And sometimes you have to place the quadrat around a tree in order to monitor. So that's what we're doing right here. And up a little bit higher in this area, that's Susan on a very, very windy day. And then that's Anna, the state parks natural resources ranger. Basically we're just looking for presence or absence. So I think they're smiling because we found a buttercup in that plot, whether it's plants in bloom, which is easiest to see, or them in their leafy form. some days it's beautiful weather up there, and some days it's really roaring, and some days it's snow has been flying. So, oops, okay. And then Susan had a revisit to monitor Oregon fairy poppies, Mechanella oregana, and these are really, really tiny plants, little annuals. So we had to scramble to try and hit all, I think it was 4 different populations in a couple mile area, again, using quadrats to count and estimate population. So it's not on Dalles Mountain Road, no, or on Dalles Mountain, no. So basically we were putting pin flags around the populations, and then she had a little rope that she could put out, and then, that was a known volume, and then she could randomly sample different parts of these plots and come up with an average number of plants, given the total area of the whole thing that we took a look at. And that's Susan and her little rare plant dog Hattie. Then we visited Barbara Robinson's property. I believe she's with us tonight, up the Klickitat River. And so this is Q6 camas, which is normally found in Northeast Oregon. Barbara noticed that there was some strange camas, and so she had somebody confirm that, and then I turned in a report this year, which was the first known report for Washington. It's a big showy camas to 2 or 3 feet tall, very, very leafy bases, also on very, very steep territory. And actually, this is Barbara's photo. This is blue cups, Gathopsis speculoides, which is in the phlox family, if I remember right. And so we found a number of plots of this on her property, and then all up the Klickitat River, which is very sparsely explored botanically. And then we participated in the Rare Care Monitoring Weekend, which was, I think, right after Memorial Day. And so here we're up on a hillside looking for Suchsdorf's, Pulsifers, monkey flower, and then Kellogg's Rush. That's Yanka with the white hat, a longtime volunteer for Rare Care from Seattle. And then I believe that's Anna, who's a young college student at the UW, who brought her mom to help monitor also. And so again, we're up on steep hillsides up the Klickitat River, monitoring both of those plants, which I think we'll have pictures of here in a second. So here's the Pulsifers monkey flower, about 1 to 2 inches tall. So, 1 in flower, they're easiest to find in flower. Not so easy to find when they're in bud, like most of the plants here. And so this is what you usually see, from 4, 5, 6 feet up. So most of those little green spots in there are actually the little monkey flower. So we're looking for those as we're walking, and then trying to count, do either an average or a estimate count or an actual count. And this is the Kellogg's Rush, again, about 1 or 2 inches tall. It's a small annual rush of kind of vernally moist scabland soils. Pretty rare in Washington, primarily because it's so small to find. And then I've had for, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years, a general survey out in the Simcoe Mountains by Sada's Pass, doing a big plant list. I think we're up to about 500 or 600 species. And this is kind of what it looks like. This was I think an April 1st. No, this was probably 1st of May. So we were there on April 1st and made 4 trips, and basically it stayed the same because of our weird winter. It just kept snowing and raining and was cold all the time up there. but lots of showy phlox and desert parsleys. And we were basically traveling fast. And so we were commonly going about 8 to 10 to maybe 11 or 12 miles a day, just walking kind of randomly all over the place, looking in habitats that a lot of times have rare plants, like the all that bare ground that you see there. That's probably what pre-existing lands before human settlement look like out east of the Cascades. And that then has lots of rare plants in many cases, which we did find a few. I think I filed 4 reports for there. One of the plants we found is least rush, Juncus hemianditis. And you can see there that that's the ruler is a centimeter ruler. So it's only about 2.5 centimeters high. Our friend Carolyn, who's retired from Department of Natural Resources and has monitored this many times, she just walks along and goes, oh, here they are, right in amongst all the grasses and things like that. And so they're easy for her to find. We have to get down on our hands and knees to look for it. And this is the pretty habitat that could be found in. So old man's beards, there on the right, GM triflorum, and there's a little bit of Drymoculus, probably glandulosa, sticky cinquefoil. There's some meadow death camas in there, and then either Arnica fulgens or Arnica sororia, making up all the yellow color in there, plus lots of grasses. And there's the Juncus hemianditis. So there, I don't know, if you try to count, there's probably about 7 or 8 in there. And then also I just noticed when I was doing this, there's little baby monkey flowers in there. So I'm wondering whether those are short flowered monkey flowers, which are not rare, or are they the rare pulsifers monkey flowers? So I guess I have to go back and look when they're in flower. And here's a different habitat for the least rush. So in this case, it's a little bit drier, more open, more disturbed. All that white flower there, that's hyacinth cluster lily, Tritalia hyacinthina. And then there's lots of Poa bulbosa in there, which is not great. Again, we're just walking a lot, looking, and it's fun. It's like a big scavenger hunt, and usually we don't see anybody else out in these particular places. And I'll just end with just a comment that it's the end of your giving period, so please consider donating to Oregon Flora. If you just did a Google search for Oregon Flora and then look at the menus at the top, you'll find a donate or how you can help button, and go down and make a donation. And currently we do have 2 volumes. The 3rd volume, which is from the Garryaceae to the Zygophalaceae, plans are to have those to the printers by the end of next year. Pre-orders probably at that time in December 2023. Books available then probably February, March, just in time for the new wildflower season in 2024. So anyway, please consider that if you're one of those that likes to give money at the end of the year.
So these are photographs taken with a smartphone. The current, around our house we live east of Mosier and several acres of oak woodland. The current generation of smartphones have fairly capable cameras, making snap shooting fairly rewarding. And it's fun to just play around with different compositions. And given the small size of a smartphone, you can get down close and quickly and easily. And they have pretty good autofocus and even vibration reduction capabilities. So you can end up with surprisingly good results with very little effort. Of necessity, we need to do initial when we first, before we built on the property, fuels reduction to reduce wildfire risk, but it's an ongoing task to keep up with excess or shedded woody debris and the like. But one thing we had noticed that the forb layer with us managing the shrub and tree layers have really responded to getting a bit more light on the ground. So we have a lot of areas that didn't seem that abundant in wildflowers now are very much so. It does pay to get down on your knees and elbows, maybe even to get down at the flower level as opposed to standing at height. Imagine if you were doing a portrait of a person, you probably wouldn't get up on a step ladder and shoot the top of their head. You'd be down at their level. And that's certainly true with the flowers. Also, with photographs on a smartphone, then it's a pretty trivial effort to post photographs to iNaturalist. I'm finding that my iNaturalist account now is my personal field guide on my phone. I'm terrible at taxonomy, can't remember names, plant or person. But this gives me a guide I can turn to. It's in my pocket to remind myself when I see a familiar face but can't remember the name. We have many areas that are in season, just carpets of glacier lily. They're particularly abundant. And one thing leads to another. The new crop of phones are do a pretty good job even at this scale, at more macro level. Some of these oaks I've walked by many times and find myself certain features just catching my eye. Finally, I'll get around to trying it out as photographs. And all of these are from last spring. And they're pretty much in chronological order. hound's tongue, I know there's some places where there were a few just sort of peeking up through the brush, and after we had thinned and cleared the brush, what was a few hound's tongue, now we have whole large communities of the hound's tongue being liberated from being overwhelmed by shrubs. So one mode with the phone is shooting a whole burst of photographs rapidly, from which you can pick the one that wasn't blowing in the wind. In this case, a hummingbird arrived at this hound's tongue in the middle of one of these bursts. And that approach is handy if there's a breeze. Then you can go through the burst of images and pick one that caught the moving flowers or leaves or whatever at a moment when they weren't moving. So spring was well along, and then in almost mid-April last spring, we had a snowstorm. Eventually, spring picked up where it left off. Take it away.
Okay, so Mike and I worked out that I would do a little bit of a program for this Russ Jolley thing. And so some of the pictures are mine and some of them have been from other people. But just a sec, what I wanted you first to do is to get out a piece of paper and a pencil. And I was going to have Kyron and Frank go through a bunch of those unlabeled photographs of flowers, and we were going to do a quiz. No? Is that the wrong class? Okay, sorry. Okay, we'll do a Russ Jolley memorial. Here we go. I first met Russ Jolley. I came down to the Gorge at about 1979 and started meeting as many botany people as I possibly could. And Russ was one of the early ones that I met. He was born on December 6, 1922. So this is a 100-year anniversary of his birth. And he died August 24th, 2011. He was born in Kansas City, was raised in Houston, attended Texas A&M, University of Leiden in the Netherlands, and during World War II, he served as a radar technician. He started to fall in love with the Pacific Northwest when he came out to Oregon State University, where he got his doctorate. We should go ahead and move I can't move the pictures ahead. So this was taken around in his 80s, I believe, these pictures. But you can move it to another one. He got a biochemistry doctorate, and he spent and he also spent a lot of time hiking into the North Country and wrote a little pamphlet or book called Hiking the Gifford Pinchot Backcountry that was written anonymously, is what I've read. And after the Mount St. Helens eruption in 1980, he left that area and began to explore the Columbia River Gorge. Early on, he taught at a university in Portland and was asked to pass a failing student whose parents were wealthy donors. He passed on that, and the student failed. And then he went on to teach at Oregon Health Sciences University and worked as a grant-funded research biochemist. One successful legacy of that work was working with an enzyme associated with melanoma. And you might want to check out Oregon Field Guide did a program on Jolley and Nancy Russell in 1997 on hunting wildflowers. I have not seen that, but I think it would be worth checking out.
Can you go ahead and advance the photos?
Yeah, advance the photos. There we go. That's good. He was asked by Nancy Russell to put together a wildflower book. And that wildflower book that we all know and love was based on this survey of wildflowers, flowering shrubs, ferns, and grasses of the Columbia River Gorge. The first one of these pamphlets was done in 1979 about, and the last one, I think, 1998. And many people worked on this. here's a number of the names, some you'll recognize, some you won't. One of the main people who worked with him was Lois Kemp. And if you didn't have the privilege to meet Lois, I'm sorry, she was just a real gem and ended up living her last days in Hawaii. She she had very sharp eyes. She did a lot. She was a self-taught botanist, and she worked as a contract botanist for the federal government. She worked for the Forest Service, I don't know who all she worked for, but I know of the Forest Service in particular. And this pamphlet was put together and was very influential for, I still use it. I still use the 1998 version when I do contract botany work like I did this summer for the Friends of the Gorge. And this is the map that you'll recognize. There's a colorful version of it that's in the Wildflowers of the Gorge book. But so if you want to know if a particular plant, what its range is, you can see whether it's from Catherine Creek, Cape Horn, way over in the east somewhere, way over in the west. And it's a very helpful book. And let's see, go on to the next slide. I wish I had the power to, there's the Columbia River Wildflowers of the Gorge map based on that earlier one. You can go to the next slide. And the plants are listed by the old scientific names. And then there's an elevation range of where you might find them. And then the east-west range, which is based on that map, the blooming season and outlier blooming times, and the abundance that has been put to that particular plant, as well as showiness, which was purely, an opinion based by different botanists, how showy they thought the plant was, how abundant it was. Yeah, go into that. And the Wildflowers of the Gorge book was dedicated to 3 different people. And I was talking with Barbara Robinson today too about, do we know who the first person was, or the third? We do not. But the second one was a wonderful woman named Elizabeth Handler, who led wildflower hikes out of Portland, I believe Portland Parks and Recreation maybe. But she came and was just a beloved friend, and she spent a lot of time with Russ, and she was asked by Greg Stone what he thought about love and romance, and he said that his romance was with the gorge, and I believe that was probably true. However, Elizabeth was also a frequent dinner partner, and she often would have rides with Russ out for various hikes, and she helped select the final photos for the book. She told me confidentially, and many of these people are gone, so I think I can share this story, that she kind of wondered if he would move the relationship any further, and he didn't seem to. So she accepted a marriage proposal from John King. And before she made that public, she talked to Russ about that, and maybe he registered a little bit of shock, but she reassured him that their relationship would continue the same. They would hike together, have dinners together, and so it went. And she and John and Russ did continue to do a lot of wonderful things together over the years. I can't. And here's a picture of Elizabeth and Russ Jolley, probably the last time I saw them at Nancy Russell's memorial in Portland. Just a real gem, yeah. And then here's a picture of Russ with Nancy Russell. He was one of the many people that Nancy worked with on getting the Scenic Act put through in, what was that? I think in where am I in my notes? In
1986.
Pardon?
1986.
1986, November of 1986. So Russ was part of the people who brought many groups out to the gorge to help people fall in love with the area and to fight to preserve it and to create the National Scenic area. Before that, he started, oh, here we go. Catching up with my notes. He had for years brought people out into the woods, starting maybe in the 1960s or before, after his time with World War II as a radar technician and his doctorate and his studies and his biochemistry work. He started realizing that he wanted to spend much more time outdoors. And he brought groups of scouts, young people from his blue collar neighborhood on Jersey Street in Portland. And there were a number of people who have been quoted as saying that he started their love for the woods and the out of doors, from astronomy to geology to just all kinds of observational naturalism. Thank you for advancing them. In the 1980s, there were a number of stories. There were a number of things that we were doing at that time. It was different than now. It was pre-genetic, as much chemistry and genetic work as what we do now. And so there were a lot of discussions about, well, what are the names? How do we divide out the lomations? And Barbara was sharing this with me earlier today. And so one of the people that we would go to was Reed College's botany professor, Bert Bream. And he said, you can't tell a lomatium by its leaves. And you just, all of these ones that you're talking about are lomatium grayi. And at that time, that may have been the case. And then as things have developed, and Mark Derrick and others now are using genetics, chemistry, morphology, and are separating lomatium grayi into several new species, lomatium cliquetet-ensis and papillioniferum and others. Another burning question of the time was, which balsam root do we have in the Columbia River Gorge? Russ sent a sample to an expert at the University of Idaho, and a trait considered that you needed to look for at that time were the rays tardily deciduous. And the rays of the balsam root in the West Gorge easily fell off and were therefore considered Balsam oryza deltoidii. And then there was another population that Barbara has collected a lot of seed from near SR 197 and SR 14, where the rays of the flower clung to the flowers and were considered Balsam oryza cariana. And perhaps some of you know where that conversation stands now, but that was how it was decided at that time in the 80s. These were different hikes up, okay. I don't know exactly where this is, but he started the trail that was at the Mimulus Castellea Hill Trail, and that was one of his beloved areas to go to.
No, Krista?
Yes.
Yeah, the photographs that we've been watching are all from a field trip on the Columbia Hills.
The Columbia Hills, yeah, that you took these pictures. Mike McKeag took the pictures. But he would take people to many, many different places, and this is in the Columbia Hills. The story I was going to share, well, and then he would also was part of removing non-native plants from wildflower meadows, and inspired many other people to do the same, including the great giant camas patch where there is the NPSO Scotch broom pull every spring. You can advance the photo. And some of the weeds took more than one person.
As I understand it, that's knapweed they're trying to pull up. It took two people to pull it.
Depends upon the time of year. If you get it when the soil's wet, you can get it with one person, but it looks pretty dry there. Be pretty hard to get at that time of year. Okay, let's look at this for just a sec. At milepost 68 on Interstate 84, there was just a barren shoulder. Russ convinced Oregon Department of Transportation to dump loads of gravel onto that site. And nearby was a gravel pit that had a lot of Barrett's penstemon that was going to be destroyed and moved around. So he was able to bring some of those Barrett's penstemon to milepost 68. He also collected quite a bit of seed from within 2 to 5 miles of this area. He wanted it to be only very closely collected seed, close in mileage to this spot. Keith Chamberlain, who was the NPSO president in Mosier for years and taught many, many people, said, Russ, how come you don't have any red flowering currant in here? And Russ said, well, I just want to have plants that are from nearby. And Keith pointed across the freeway and up into the cliff and said, well, what's that growing up in the cliffs right over there? There's a red flowering currant right up there. And he didn't realize that Russ was colorblind and he could not see the red flowering currant that was across the road. So after that, he started planting red flowering currant on the site. And thanks to Barbara for that story. And he worked there many, oftentimes at the end of a field trip, he would bring the people by there and get them to pull weeds and be part of this amazing wildflower garden that he started. And I know Elizabeth Stanek took it on for some years, and I'm sure there are many people who are needed to spend time in this and pull out tall oat grass and oyster flower and other things that have taken on and growing up into that area, but there's still some beautiful things in there. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Okay, and then one of the last times I saw him out in the field would have been this 2007 hike. Here are Drew Merritt and Kristen Curran from Humble Roots Nursery. We were on the Weldon Wagon Trail out of Hewsum, Washington. And we were going along, looking at the plants and going, I wonder what Jolley would say about this. And then we realized that he had come and joined us. Greg Stone had brought him out and they hiked up to join us on the Weldon Wagon Trail. So you can advance the slide. See, there we go. Yeah. There we go. And there's Russ Jolley on the Weldon Wagon Trail talking with Dave Predick, who is an NPSO out of Eugene. And his brother lives at the top of the Weldon Wagon Trail and has been a steward in that area for the DNR for some years, John Predick. And there's Greg Stone at the end. I think Greg and perhaps others were part of convincing Russ in his latter days that maybe it wasn't such a great idea that he keep driving his car, and said that, well, we will bring you to your beloved places in the gorge if you'll kind of give up the keys. We will drive you. And I believe Greg was one of the most, loyal that continued to do that for a long, long time as he aged. Yeah. Good. There we are on the Weldon Wagon Trail. And I was a contract trail builder, and I didn't realize how enthusiastic Russ was about trail building because I was often gone in the summers building trails in other parts of Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. And I thought of Russ as being a wildflower guy, but it turns out he was a very passionate trailblazer, and he enlisted many different people into helping him create trails into some of the most beautiful old growth places within the gorge.
Let me comment just on this slide. We took it. We didn't get to know Russ until he was already living at Selwood Landing in Selwood when he no longer could drive. But we would go to pick him up, and here there would be people in wheelchairs and on oxygen, and he would come out with his saw because no matter where you took him, he just might need that saw. So this was Lost Creek, which trail he did create. But, you know, if you went down Lost Creek and he saw anything out of the way, he had to get that saw out and clear it so it would be perfect.
So that's Marianne Nelson talking?
Yes.
And how many times did he take you to Lost Creek?
Probably only 3 times with Russ, because we didn't get to know him until 2007. So this was 2007. And then by 2009, he couldn't go out anymore. In fact, I think the last time at Mamaloose was 2008.
And everyone who, if you don't know where Lost Creek is, did he name it? Susan and Barbara, does anybody know if he named this Lost Creek?
Lost Creek was already named.
Okay.
It found this little pocket of old growth that hadn't been logged and adopted it. And built his trail system in there.
Near Underwood. And what is that road that you take? It's off of 14.
It's just outside of Willard.
Willard. Right. So let's see more of those, the camp and everything. You can advance.
That's great, Marianne. This was taken in 2000 up on the Upper Horsetail Falls loop that he built, I believe, in the 60s with scouts that they kept enlarging that area. And I only went up there once, but he said he talked with the Forest Service and they said, as long as you don't dig the dirt and you just cut brush out of the way, it's fine to make little trails here and there. And this trail went quite a ways. You can advance the, not only was it a nice little trail, maybe they didn't tell him that he really shouldn't build log cabins, but there was this 3-sided shelter up there and various camps that these Boy Scouts or groups that he would take would stay in up there. And that last picture, go back to the last one for just a sec. Some of you may have known the man in the center, Clint Vilbig. He was a big cross-country ski person who took a lot of people out on trips in the Northwest.
Oh, that's Nancy Chapman's ex-husband? I mean, spouse, right? Nancy
I don't know, it's Clint Vilbig. I don't know his spouses.
Yes.
And then the other gentleman is a retired linguist who is a from UCLA, Tom Pynchon, who lives in Hood River. And I saw the one time where I'd heard of, well, I didn't know that Russ had quite a temper. And Tom was giving us a long-winded story about how he'd met his wonderful wife. And I was thinking, gee, this is really kind of going on for a while. And he's, as a retired professor, he didn't know when to stop until Russ stopped him with angry sounds about, why are you going on for such a long time? And I thought they would never hike again together. And it turned out that Tom and Russ did many, many hikes together. Tom was leading a hiking program in Hood River, and Tom knew where all the trails were. So that was kind of fun. And I recently met and this is another picture of that group at that cabin. It's quite a nice cabin. With Clint and yeah, you can go advance the films. And this I have as Upper Horsetail Falls, but Marianne, do you know, I think this was probably on Lost Creek, or I think it was at Skamania. There was a trail that he took us up to that he was developing around Skamania, like maybe Salmon Falls Road. And I was with Russ and two other women. They were pushing 80, and I was complaining about my 50th birthday. And I thought, oh, I'm turning 50. This is really horrible. And Russ said, you're just bragging. and thought about, here I was with these 80-year-olds.
I think that might be Duncan Creek. Russ had a trail system that went from Beacon Rock State Park west over to Duncan Creek or somewhere beyond that. And I went on a hike with him there. And yeah, you had to get across the creek by crawling on your hands and knees on this log.
Duncan Creek, was that up near Salmon Falls Road?
Well, it's east of Salmon Falls, but near the community of Skamania.
Yeah.
So all on Forest Service land. And he told me the same story, that the Forest Service said he could make trails in there as long as he didn't disturb the ground. So he would just take his saw and cut some brush back, and so he could see his route.
Yep.
He cut notches in the logs because he couldn't log it out. So he'd have a notch, and that was where he stepped over the log.
And I think this was a new route that he was working on. It wasn't quite as fancy as that one above Upper Horsetail Falls. But I just went in there one time. And recently I met the regional U.S. Forest Service biologist, Connor England, I believe is his name. And I mentioned some of these stories and some of these trails. And Connor, he's just been here a short time, but he'd already heard of and had GPS coordinates for a Russ Jolley tree that he wanted to make sure did not get included in any of the partial cuts that they're planning.
This slide is not over a creek. When we went to Lost Creek with Russ, he had this wonderful sense of humor. He said to me, do you teeter-totter? And I said, well, I teeter-totter with my grandkids. And he said, well, would you teeter-totter with me? And I'm like, what do you mean? Well, then he took us to this log that he and his friends had balanced. You can see the balance point there. And he crawled out. He was accustomed to crawling across logs. And he got on one end, and that's me at the other. And I got on the other end, and we teeter-tottered.
That is fantastic, Marianne. I wondered what the deal was with this.
And there he is on his end.
That is wonderful.
That's crazy. He was already losing his sight when he was doing this kind of thing.
Well, yeah, he used to say, I'm blind in one eye and I can't see out of the other. But his memory was just impeccable. You could take him on a trail, and even if he couldn't see, he could tell you that you were coming upon something that was very important.
Love that picture.
We were lucky to have these elders.
That's the campground he built at Lost Creek. He slept many nights there. And that's my husband, Tom, with him.
Tom Nelson?
Yes.
Oh yeah, John, Mike and I were trying to figure out was this a place that got, walked down that much from his activity, or did the public come into this same spot?
The public must have come into it, because as we've come back, when we've hiked it more recently, very rarely do we really find other people, but we will find remains of campers in this campsite. So I think Brian Stenberg was one of the people that helped him do this. I don't know who else, but it definitely was used by other people.
Yeah, I know other people that go in there every year. Russ felt the best way to protect places was take as many people there as possible and show them the values that he thought were important about those places. And so he took everybody to Lost Creek, and then he made you swear that you would defend it from logging. And the same with the Camas Patch. He took me there and he said, you have to protect this site.
Well, Daryl Lloyd formed a group to try and protect this site, but I don't know what's happened to it since Daryl's been, kind of declining.
And Daryl had an article put in the Salem newspaper to tell people how to get there. But Lisa had a question. Is this where he left frying pans? Well, he would leave a frying pan in the hollow of a tree wherever he camped. And then Nancy Chapman said he would expect you to eat out of it when you went and camped with him. Right? How about that, Paul? Did you like rusty pans or did you take your own?
I know where the frying pan is at this site.
Yeah, I found it too.
It's in the hollow of a cedar tree.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, I only went camping with them once with Dee and Melanie and Barbara and Greg and a couple other people, and you know, we had to carry his way of carrying stuff was in big coffee cans, you know, with wire loops and so we were, you know, a bunch of greenhorns, you know, with heavy packs, you know, wine and beer and whatever, you know, cheese and he would make like a 6-course breakfast and 6-course dinner and that kind of thing. And so Susan and I and a couple others, Barbara has been included, Melanie's been included. We've done Russ Jolley Memorial breakfast in honor of that particular thing, but I've never camped here at this place.
When was that, Paul?
Oh boy, I don't know, mid 2000s. It had to actually been earlier. It may have been in the 1990s sometime.
Can you folks hear me? This is Barbara.
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
So I was having knee problems, and Russ was doing a camp out to Lost Creek with Melanie and Dee, and he called me and he said, Melanie and Dee want you to come along with us. And I said, I'd love to, but I don't think I can backpack in there because of my knees. And he said, that's okay, I'll carry your backpack in. And I said, Russ, you can't do that, because, you know, he was pretty old then. And he said, sure I can. And so what happened was I did go, and he and Melanie walked in with my backpack, carried that in, and then he went back out and carried in his backpack. And that's how I got to spend the night with him. He actually carried my backpack in.
Wow.
That's great.
It's a beautiful glade and massive trees around there.
Yeah.
One other thing, Krista, are we going to talk about the Memaloose Trail at all?
Oh, I'm done, Barbara. I skipped that. Yeah.
Okay.
How many more slides are there, Frank? Because we can turn on our video.
Let's see a couple more slides and go to the end. I think we're getting close.
Is that?
Oh,
is that him?
Yes.
I think so. Go one more. Oh. Yeah, Barbara, if you wanted to talk about Memaloose, it'd be great. And go to the last one. There we go. There. This is the last one, Barbara, if you want to talk about Memaloose.
Okay, so Russ Jolley created the Memaloose Trail. He laid it out, and he he drafted a lot of us to help prune it out. But there was one piece of land that broke up the trail and wasn't yet in public ownership. And so he created a flyer and had a lot of us lobby, as he certainly lobbied, the Forest Service to buy that. Well, the Forest Service was a little bit put out, because not only was he creating a trail without their permission, but he was now lobbying for them to buy land for that trail. And I can remember when Stan Hinatsu had just been hired, he approached Russ and me near there and said, well, you're not supposed to be pruning poison oak here. It didn't work. We pruned all the poison oak we wanted to. But anyway, it is Russ, the Memaloose Trail, and also the purchase of the Harvey property by the Forest Service can be credited to Russ, especially. And I think this one's at the top of Castellea Hill rather than Meadow Hill here.
This is Marsh Hill, Barbara.
is it Marsh Hill? I couldn't
Yep.
quite. But anyway, there are like about 3 hills. My favorite is what he called Castellea Hill, and I think can't remember even what they call it now. But beautiful, beautiful area. One other thing I'll mention is that Russ always complained, because he was one of the people when the Gorge Bill was passed. A group went around, official group went around labeling land as agricultural or forest or open space. But if they called it open space, that was going to put a bunch of regulations on it, like you couldn't do things with it. So they were very reluctant to call any private land open space. Where they did, they got into some trouble for it. Anyway, so the whole Mumbles area got designated as agricultural land. And Russ always was unhappy about that. He thought there ought to be a 4th category recreational, but there wasn't. And so just be aware that in the Gorge Bill, the Memaloose area, which is some of the best botany we have, is officially labeled agricultural, which I think he would still be unhappy with.
People are asking what's happening here, and I thought people were scattering seed or something, but this is spreading Russ's ashes to the winds.
Yes, that's right. We did that day.
So one other thing I wanted to mention about Russ is, yeah, he liked to create trail plans. And so I have, besides his Hiking the Gifford Pinchot Backcountry, which was the first trail guide ever written for the Gifford Pinchot, I also have something called the Talipus Trail that, and he did everything anonymously, so it's all by the Sierra Club, but was all typed on Russ's typewriter. So he had a whole trail plan for the rim of the gorge on the Oregon side. So his Horsetail Falls Trail, his trail system with the cabins, there were actually 2 cabins up there that got burnt up in the Eagle Creek fire, was all part of this trail system that Russ was proposing to link existing trails together and have a route across the rim of the gorge. And he probably had others that I don't have copies of, but he would rate these plans, and he loved looking at maps. And so after he passed away, we got his map collection and went through it, and I think divvied up or picked out the most important maps that he had marked up. And so he had some that had trail proposals on them.
Huh, and then Krista, didn't you say that you thought he had a really important map that ended up at some Forest Service headquarters?
One of the things that he contributed to the Gorge Commission work is a set of the USGS maps for the gorge marked with the rare plants known at that time. And these, I used them for early contract work in the gorge, and they would still have a lot of value. Some of those plants are no longer rare. There's been more found than were known at that time. And then, but some of that would still be very important data for climate change that's happening, to see how those populations may or may not have changed. And I would guess that those maps are still within the big map case in the Gorge Commission office, or that they have them somewhere there.